Good morning, everyone. I'm Keren Yarhi-Milo. I'm the Dean of CEPA, the Adlai Stevenson Professor of International Relations, and co-founders of CEPA's Institute of Global Politics. I am delighted to welcome you today to today's timely and important conversation. As the Dean of CEPA, it is my privilege to convene discussions that bring together world leaders, scholars, practitioners, to wrestle with some of the most urgent and complex issues shaping our world. And few challenges loom larger or even have proven more intractable than the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Yes, yet it is precisely because of the difficulty and sensitivity of this issue that we must continue to engage, imagine alternative visions, and explore pathways towards peace, especially the broader possibility of a viable two-state solution, which is the topic of the discussion today as well. Today's discussion, as you know, comes at a critical and historic moment. We are just days into phase one of the Washington brokered peace agreement, which includes hostage and prisoners exchanges, humanitarian corridors into Gaza, and partial military withdrawals. The plan represents the most comprehensive US-backed framework in years, one that even critiques acknowledge owes much to the diplomatic initiative led by President Donald Trump, whose negotiations helped lay the groundwork for this fragile but genuine opening. At the same time, the ceasefire remains under strain. Sporadic violence has flared already, and both sides have accused one another in violations. So yes, implementation is uneven, but the fact that dialogue continues and the ceasefire still holds is a good sign. So it is against this backdrop of hope tempered by realism that today's dialogue takes on particular urgency. We are really honored to welcome two distinguished statesmen who have spent their entire careers grappling with this issue, Mr. Nasser al-Kidwa and Mr. Ehud Olmert. Mr. al-Kidwa has long been a central figure in Palestinian diplomacy, serving as the Palestinian permanent observer to the United Nations, and later as a Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Olmert's career spans more than 4 decades, including his tenure as Israel's 12th prime minister, during which he advanced one of the most detailed Israeli proposals for a two-state solution. Together, Mr. Olmert and al-Kidwa have argued that the ceasefire must be more than a pause. It must be the beginning of a credible political process that restores agencies to both peoples and reimagines coexistence on the basis of mutual sovereignty. That shared vision is precisely what brings us together today. Guiding our conversation is my colleague, Jacob Lew, former U.S. Ambassador to Israel under the Biden administration, 76 U.S. Secretary of the Treasury, and now Professor of International Public Affairs here at CEPA. He's also the Policy Director at the Institute of Global Politics, and his deep experience in diplomacy and policy making will help frame today's discussion in terms of both political feasibility and moral responsibility. I want to thank my colleagues at the Institute of Global Politics for organizing this timely event, for all of you for joining us, for what I know will be a thoughtful, substantive, and I hope constructive exchange. And with that, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to Secretary Lew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keren, and thank you, Prime Minister Olmert and Foreign Minister al-Kidwa, for being with us this morning. I've had the privilege and the pleasure to talk with both of you about these issues, and very much look forward to going into some of the thinking behind the work you've done together to try to promote a plan for the future. Given the enormity of the moment and what's going on, I would be remiss not to begin with getting your assessment as we start out of where we are right now. As Keren said in her introductory remarks, this is a fragile moment. What is your assessment of whether the ceasefire is holding, can hold, and whether this is a moment that actually permits the process to continue to proceed on to the longer term kind of issues that you've worked on together. Why don't we begin, Ehud, with you, and then Nasser, please jump in right after.
Thank you, Secretary. I'm honored and delighted to be your guest and the guest of the university and Professor Milo, and of course with my partner from the Palestinian side, Dr. Nasser al-Kidwa. I think that we have today something which is, for many of us, for all of us living in the Middle East, of course, is a very positive development, which is a ceasefire. What is called and titled as Peace 2025, which was the title of the event hosted by President Assisi in Sharm el-Sheikh a week ago, with President Trump and so many leaders from every corner of the world, was called Peace 2025. But the truth is that what we have now is a comprehensive agreement to end the war in Gaza. This is the title of the agreement that was signed. Now, it is very important because we were fighting for, we were campaigning for, we were criticizing the Israeli government for attempting to expand the war, which we thought had to end long ago. So the fact that finally President Trump forced the Israeli side and probably manipulated successfully the other side, the brokers and the Qataris and the Egyptians and the Turks, and through them also Hamas, to agree to end the war, is very important. And of course, the return of all the hostages, live hostages, living hostages, and the hopeful return of all the bodies of the others is very important. But that's what we have now. We have a fragile ceasefire that can be broken and violated every moment. In fact, it is not what we know to be ceasefire, a real ceasefire, because there are all kinds of slight confrontations. Here, a few Palestinians were killed. Here, a couple of Israeli soldiers were killed. So it's not even yet complete at that stage. But hopefully it will be preserved in the presence of Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in the Middle East, and perhaps the visit of Vice President Vance will support the ceasefire. But this is what we have. As for a much broader process, it remains to be seen. We have presented, Dr. al-Kidwa and myself have presented a basis for an understanding about a comprehensive peace on the basis of two states in 67 borders and so on and so forth, which we may refer to later. But this is not something of what was accepted by the two sides. And let's hopefully pass this first stage, that the peace, that the ceasefire is protected in a careful manner, and then see how we can move, particularly what President Trump has in mind about the next step.
Thank you. Dr. al-Kidwa.
Yes, I too would like to express our appreciation, my appreciation and my thanks for the invitation and for the organization and for the attendees to be here. That's, I think, could be very useful and productive meeting. So thank you again. But with regard to your question, of course, what we have now is, yes, a fragile ceasefire that is holding largely, with some exceptions, of course, especially what happened 2 days ago in Rafah, when there was some Israeli raids against some Hamas positions and things like that, that threatened the integrity of the ceasefire. But then I think that has passed, and now we are back to the continuation of the ceasefire and to follow up. I think I can say that two things should happen. One, we should not allow anybody to break this deal. And two, I think we need to proceed, because if we don't proceed, it's going to get broken. So we have to proceed. And in this regard, we have too many difficult issues. For instance, the position vis-a-vis Hamas. I mean, that has to be clearer. And frankly, we need to stop double talk and things like that, and say things as they are. What do we want to achieve in this regard? And then, of course, the issue of governance of Gaza. The deal or the initiative of the president proposes peace bureau or peace council that is supervisory, in my opinion, and a body that would discuss politics and general policies and things like that, which is okay. But then it does also propose a board of directors headed by Mr. Tony Blair that actually governs Gaza Strip. And I have to be careful here and say this is not personal, but no foreigner could be brought to Gaza Strip to govern Gaza or any other part of the Palestinian territory. This is not possible, and we cannot afford something like that. So we need to continue negotiations. We need to continue talking to each other collectively so that we can have a vision about what should happen. But definitely, we have to have a Palestinian body that is organically linked to the Palestinian Authority. And yes, we can have some observatory or some supervisory body in the form of board of peace that was proposed by President Trump. And then, of course, there is the issue of security in the form of, now everybody is talking about international force that is authorized by the Security Council, which is fine. That does not make the force, by the way, peacekeeping operation, but nevertheless, it gives it some authority. It gives it political cover that would allow it to function in the region. But at the same time, I think I need to stress the fact that there is a need also for a Palestinian security force in the amount of 10,000, 15,000 men that will do the actual job and will cooperate and coordinate with the international force. So that there are some difficult issues ahead waiting for us, in addition, of course, to the issue of complete Israeli withdrawal from Gaza Strip without return. And this is very important, not only because of political reasons, but because of practical reasons if we want to reconstruct Gaza. And then there is the issue of the overall political solution in the form of two-state solution that we proposed, as Ehud Olmert has said earlier, something like 14 months ago or something like that. Thank you.
So as a way perhaps of transitioning to talking about the proposal that the two of you have worked on, do you see points of overlap between the 20 points that were agreed to by all the parties just last week? In particular, in terms of security in Gaza, your proposal calls for a temporary Arab security presence. That's not exactly the same as the joint international force that's in the 20 points, but it would be, I think, helpful in turning to your proposal, perhaps use what is in the 20 points that may be a bridge to what you have in mind. And Dr. al-Kidwa, why don't we begin with you?
Yeah, okay. Listen, there are, of course, some similarities and there are some meeting points, if you wish. You refer to one in the form of security, because we understood the need for an additional security presence. And we proposed, and yes, you are right, a temporary Arab presence, which was not very popular because many people preferred the international force. But frankly, it's not exactly an international force. It's somewhere in between. It's an Arab presence and international force. The important thing is to provide for additional security measures that would then allow the cooperation and coordination between this force and the Palestinian security force. There are other points as well. For instance, the key, in my opinion, the key to the issue of governance is what we proposed. We said that we need to establish a new Palestinian body that's organically linked to the Palestinian Authority. At the end of the day, this is what we are going to have. How exactly, I'm not sure, but definitely I think this will be the parameters or the framework of what we are going to happen. More importantly, what we propose in terms of the overall political solution is what's going to happen. We said that we need an overall political solution in the form of two states, Israel and Palestine, on the basis of 1967 borders, with some kind of swap, 4.4%, that was Olmert's proposal, and so on and so forth. So yes, there are similarity with regard to what we did propose in terms of ending the war in Gaza, and also with regard to the overall political solution. And I believe at the end will come also the status of Jerusalem. And I think what we propose will be some kind of source for optimism and source of finding the appropriate solution.
Prime Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. I want to say something presumptuous, arrogant, typically Israeli. Don't worry. One day, when a peace treaty will be signed between Israel and Palestine, I hope it will happen soon, but it may take some time. One day, the peace treaty that will be signed will be identical to what Dr. al-Kidwa and myself proposed in our very short page and a half, which I guess a copy of which you also have at the time that you were still ambassador.
Yes.
Right? This will be. There can be no other. There can be no other. At the end of the day, there will be a Palestinian state alongside the state of Israel. The Palestinian state will have a territory which is based on the 67 borders, and that will have a certain territory annexed. We talked about 4.4%. I don't want to go into all the details, but this is it. This will be, and unfortunately for some, but inevitably in terms of the substance, the old city of Jerusalem will not be under any explicit political sovereignty of either Israel or Palestine. It will be administered by a trust of few nations, Arab nations, Israel, America, so that it will provide all the believers that want to come to the holy places, Jews, Christians, Muslims, the access to do it, and so on. This, in essence, this will be the agreement. Now, this is what we proposed, and we linked it in our statement, signed statement, to also ending of the war in Gaza, because without ending the war in Gaza, without settling that aspect of a much broader problem, there is not any beginning that we can move forward with. However, while we talk specifically about all these basic parameters, essential parameters that are in the core of the conflict, the 20 points of President Trump do not mention anything. The only thing that there is that there is some hint in a very soft language that talks about that it will leave the Palestinians a certain space for trying to achieve goals, Palestinian goals. More or less, that's what it says, but it doesn't talk about two-state, and it doesn't talk about all the other aspects that we have mentioned. So, what is important in the Trump 20 points? I think what is very important, maybe even revolutionary, it has proved what we knew, what I knew, what you, Jake, knew, what Nasser knew all along, that there is only one person in the whole world which has the power of taking the two sides here, shaking them, and forcing them to embark on something more meaningful. There is no one else all of the European leaders, as important as they are, and I respect them, and I don't think that they're enemies of Israel or that they're sold out to one side or to the other. That's all nonsense. They are good, decent guys that are anxious to move forward somewhere positive. Macron and Sturmer and Chancellor Martin and Prime Minister Carney from Canada and so on and so forth. They have no power to force their will on any of the sides. The only guy that has it for a short period of time. I don't know how long. I don't know how long because of American problems and American domestic issues that I'm not familiar with, perhaps completely. But he has it now. And he forced Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire after he forced him to apologize to the Qataris in the most strange manner, to put it mildly, okay? Having a Qatari guy sitting next to Netanyahu when Netanyahu reads out a text that was dictated to him by the Qataris to apologize for what the Israeli attack there. This is not something that anyone before him, before Trump, could do because of many reasons. Doesn't matter. And I have enormous respect, I'd say even personal love to President Biden, but he was not in a position to do what Trump does. So the question now, the most important thing is Trump, does he know what he wants? Does he have a broad understanding of all the complexities and the sensitivities? Does he have the right people with him? He has Witkoff, he has Jared Kushner, but I'm talking about more experts, knowledgeable of the backgrounds and the sensitivities and the complexities and the possible ramifications and so on and so forth. And is he ready to come to the Israeli Prime Minister and to tell him, Netanyahu, the game is over. We are moving forward now into a comprehensive solution. If you want to do it, fine. If you don't want to do it, I'm sick and tired of wasting my time on these problems. I think he has to do it. He can do it. Question is, does he know what he wants? Does he have the necessary advice that can help him with? And is he prepared to carry on forcefully in order to achieve it?
So, picking up on that, I know that the plan that you envision is not based on a solution to Gaza, but the immediate challenge is how to stabilize Gaza, how to have some minimal level of security in Gaza, how to have an ability for Gaza to be governed. Is there an opportunity in Gaza to demonstrate some of the principles that would be necessary for there to be fuller embrace of the longer term plans that you've together agreed are the goal? And in particular,
Jack, before Nasser answers this, which he needs to answer, obviously, I just want to say one thing. A prerequisite for any movement, a more stable and more far-reaching solution of Gaza is the realization in Israel that Gaza is Palestine. That Gaza is not part of Israel and is not going to be part of Israel. It has to be governed by Gaza, by Palestinians, and that they have to be an essential part of every movement going forward.
So, but that's actually the point exactly that I was driving at. Right now in Gaza, I don't know that there is a Palestinian entity that could step in and immediately take over. My assessment was, when I was there, less than a year ago, that it would take a lot more than any one entity could do. And a lot of the issues in the 20 points, the principles in the 20 points, were things that we were working on, a year ago and 18 months ago. The notion that you have the Arab countries, the Gulf, the United States, Europe, all together saying something has to move forward in Gaza. Is there something as a transitional form of governance that provides an opportunity for there to be some confidence building where Palestinian Authority related personnel, who are the only people on the ground to do many of the tasks that have to be done, whether it's restoring the water, the power, or policing the streets, have to be engaged? And Dr. al-Kidwa, I heard you say it couldn't be an international force, but in the context of a transition in Gaza, is there some opportunity, if not necessity, to do something that's not a final resolution, but a bridge that perhaps could allow for the kinds of confidence that are needed to go forward to start to build up?
Well, listen, Gaza is a very important situation. And yes, we need to solve the problem in Gaza and we need to find overall political arrangements for Gaza. But definitely, it's not the end of the story. It's only Gaza. And we need to have an overall political solution, as I said earlier. And Ehud Olmert also said that. And that is in the form of two states, Israel and Palestine, based on 1967 border, etc., etc. Now, is this easy to do? No, it's not easy to do. You refer to the fact that there is no ready entity to do that because Gaza was under the governance of Hamas, under the control of Hamas for so many years. And because of the fact that the Palestinian Authority as is not acceptable for the Israelis, for the Americans, probably for some Arabs, and maybe for some Gazans as well. So what's the solution here? The solution here is to find some kind of a new entity that is organically linked, as I said earlier, to the Palestinian Authority. Now, this of course is not easy to do, but I think if we find the right structure, we can do it. And the right structure is simply we need to have governance by Palestinians in the form of this new political entity or new governing entity, plus the supervisory board as proposed, the Board of Peace, for instance. But we can't afford having other plans and other structures and other things. Now, I know that we have so many plans now. And frankly, they are good plans in theory, but I don't think that they can be implemented as such. What we need first is to arrange for the appropriate structures. We need to reach some appropriate understanding, and then we can have the group of people, competent people that can run Gaza and can do the necessary project and necessary things, subject, of course, to the supervision that I spoke about. But let's not mix up things and add board of directors and I don't know what, and some experts, some foreigners, some I don't know what, and plans and projects, and you name it. I mean, everybody wants a piece of from this cake, and I think there's no cake at the end of the day. It's a very difficult situation. I mean, it's terrible situation. We need to reconstruct Gaza from scratch, and that is very difficult and costly at the same time. So maybe we need to direct our efforts towards finding the money, finding the financing, and finding the appropriate people that can do the job. Unfortunately, there is no enough dialogue among the parties until now. So there is no agreement on these simple things. What kind of Palestinian entity we want to have.
But if I could push you a little bit on that, I as Treasury Secretary, I had a lot of experience working with the IMF, going into countries that needed support. In the situation right now in Gaza, there's some similarities because someone is going to have to write a check. And whether it's Gulf countries or international bodies, they're going to want to have some confidence that the money will go to what it's intended for and be sustainable. That often leads to a shared governance arrangement for a transitional period, which is very hard. I mean, even in the context of the IMF with a standing government, it's been known to undermine governments in their own countries. And one of the challenges was always, how do you not have that be the end result? But it is something that permits for a transition.
The first part is fine. Nobody is against any kind of supervision that would alleviate any fears on the part of donors with regard to their money, and the money should go in the right direction. That's fine. But shared governance, I don't know what does this mean. Now, I know, Mr. Secretary, that those guys who dealt with money are too smart, and of course they come with ideas that many times they look bizarre. What does it mean, shared governance? Palestinians and non-Palestinians sitting together. Who will actually have the say, the decision? Probably the foreigner, which takes us to the same starting point. That foreigner does not know the situation in Gaza, especially destroyed Gaza. You have a situation that is unprecedented, and you need to have people who knows the place, and more importantly, they enjoy the trust of the population. They are known by the population, and they enjoy the trust, and they can do the job. They are competent enough to do the job. Now, again, supervision, yes. Okay, any kind of supervision is something that I personally have no problem with. But actual governance, no, because any Palestinian territory can be governed only by Palestinians, irrespective of anything and irrespective of the term, including shared governance, Mr. Secretary.
David?
Yes, I will try perhaps wrap it up in a somewhat softer manner in order to see if we can present it in a more acceptable way. I think that the chief executive of Gaza has to be Palestinian, independent executive authority. All right, and he has to be appointed with an agreement approval of the Palestinian Authority, because Palestinian Authority is the only Palestinian framework, which is recognized by all the agreements signed between Palestine and Israel, and also by all the international organizations. So this has to be approved by them. But the chief executive has to have independent executive authorities to be able to run it outside of the complexities and the sensitivities and the corruption which characterize the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Okay, this is one thing. What the operation in Gaza will need in order to bring back Gaza into life, to build Gaza, it will need a certain coordination with the international community, with international organizations, with international institutions, with countries that are prepared in principle to even write the checks for talking about tens of billions of dollars to rebuild Gaza. And I do think that Tony Blair can be a good guy for that. I know Tony. I know that he was always interested in the Middle East, and he was involved, and he was the emissary of the quartet after he retired from Prime Minister. And I think he can contribute, not as a chief executive. Chief executive has to be Palestinian because Gaza is part of Palestine, and it has to be reinstated from day one. Okay, so that the international community will be aware of that, and also that some of the messianic, crazy, fundamentalist, radicals, killers, terrorists that are now members of the Israeli government will understand that there is no game here for them to be part of. But supervising, coordinating international body is something that can be very helpful. And I'm not familiar, perhaps there may be some others, but I'm not familiar with international figures other than Tony Blair, which can potentially do this job better than him. And therefore, I think that in that context, it should be. And also, I want to say one thing about the security force. I'm a supporter of international security force. I'm in favor of course, the security force has to be based on soldiers coming from moderate Arab countries, including Palestinians. By the way, Palestinians, of course, and Jordanians and Egyptians, hopefully Emiratis, and if the Saudis will be part of it, great. I think that it can be very useful and very helpful and very positive if there will be some European representatives. We need the international community to be part of the rebuilding process in a very sensitive and accurate definition of the roles and the positions. But like the Americans now send 200 American soldiers to supervise the implementation of the ceasefire. And they are now in Israel and they are supervising it, not depending on the reports that they necessarily get from the Israeli intelligence, but in their own eyes, they check and they observe and they supervise everything in order to help. I don't think that it will be such a bad idea if there will be a British soldiers, and I understand that Prime Minister Sturmer is in favor of it, and perhaps French soldiers and German soldiers and Dutch soldiers and some more that will be complementing in coordination with the Arab soldiers that will be part of the security force that will need to make sure that no terrorist forces are trying to re-emerge again in Gaza, because that's what we want to block as a preliminary stage in order to change everything in Gaza. So, I think in this perhaps somewhat softer wrapping, maybe Dr.
This is the magic. This is the magic of Olmert, Listen, I need to say that I, for one, do not have a problem with neither supervisory boards nor coordinating boards, as long as we have the actual implemented, actual governance being done by Palestinians, because it should be genuine Palestinians. And by the way, if we don't do that, if you do something else, the population in Gaza is hungry and is sick and is in terrible situation. And for these reasons, they will go along with whatever arrangements the international community does, but only for a short while.
Just on a little note of optimism, when the last ceasefire was implemented and the Rafah border crossing was opened, it was opened in a manner that's not inconsistent with what you've described. There were Palestinian security forces, there were European observers, there was international monitoring, and the challenge will come in some ways on the symbols as much as the realities. I remember endless discussions of whether there could be flags or arm patches on the security forces. In the end, there need to be people on the ground who are maintaining security, and that will include Palestinians and hopefully others. My concern is how many people you need to stabilize all of the Gaza Strip. You have to start somewhere, though. And there was an initial beginning in the last ceasefire in Rafah that could be built on going forward. If I can turn the focus to your plan.
May I just say something here? Because what is important in my mind, maybe even more than this, is to ensure that there will be Israeli withdrawal without return.
Without what? I couldn't hear you.
Without return, because returning Israeli forces would mean controlling the borders. And controlling the borders would mean deciding whether iron can get in or not, wood can get in or not, and so on and so forth. You cannot reconstruct Gaza this way. So we need to change the relationship between Israel and Gaza Strip as prelude to changing the relationship between Israel and the West Bank. And of course, that was going to be some kind of an experience that would, of course, show the way forward with regard to the overall political solution.
Dr. al-Kidwa, if I may say, there will always be an Israeli military presence outside on the Israeli side of the border between us and Gaza, or between us and the Palestinian state. That's obvious, and that will never be different. If you're talking about a presence in the border between Gaza and Egypt, for instance, like in Rafah, in the Philadelphia line, and so on and so forth, that's precisely why we want to have an international security force that will be brought in order to supervise and to control any possible changes that might assist, terrorist groups from rising again into a position in Gaza. I think that this is something that had there been a much better, softer, greater trust between Israeli and Palestinians, and there is some, but not enough in my mind, not with Gaza, but in the West Bank and with the authority, all these technical issues could have been resolved easily. question is, and this is my question, I guess it's yours just as well. What is the concept, what is the idea, if he has one, of the American administration about the next phase? Not in general terms, not in broad terms, which are not specific and not explicit. What you guys want to happen? Do you want to start a process of negotiations towards a two-state solution or not? If you are not, then I'm afraid that this is a waste of a good opportunity.
So
If you are, you have to make it be seen and felt rapidly.
I can't speak obviously for the current administration, but I can say that, you know, for the 14 months that I was there, the message that we were delivering was there has to be a process that can lead and will lead to the discussion of a two-state solution.
Right.
There was always some tension about what irreversible meant, because it had to be with the consent of both parties, and that meant Israel had to agree. But the reason we took that view, I think, hasn't changed. And I think President Trump has echoed this, and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have echoed this. For the regional outlook to be where Israel wants it, where we want it, where I think the other countries in the region want it, that discussion has to take place. We presented it as the thing that had to be on the table for Saudi normalization to happen. That, when I was there at the height of the war, was not enough to get the conversation going. The question is, now that we're at a ceasefire, we have an agreement to proceed to a phase 2 discussion, can you get there? And if I can ask you, maybe turn the table, is the environment in Israel now such that the conversation can be had? When I was there, it was very difficult even to have the conversation for understandable reasons. October 7th was an ongoing trauma. But with the return of the living hostages and a ceasefire, and hopefully the return of the remains of the hostages who were killed, is there a place in Israel now to have this conversation? Because the future, in terms of all of the benefits of regional cooperation, in some way are going to hit either a stopping point or start to slip away if that conversation can't happen.
Can I make it before Ehud? Listen, I want Israeli engagement. We need that, and it's necessary to reach some kind of an overall final solution that's working. I have no problem with that. But to say that we need a process that lead to a discussion on a Palestinian state, that means giving the Israeli side almost a veto power, which is not going to solve anything. We need to make it clear that we are going in that direction, but in that path, we need the Israeli engagement and we need to have a discussion. So either choose, Mr. Secretary, either a process or a discussion. Process leading to two-state solution, or a discussion that leads to the two-state solution, but not a process leading to a discussion on the two-state solution.
So I was answering Ehud's question about the current administration. I said I can't speak for them. We had a clear position. It had to be a process. And
yes, process leading to the two-state solution.
Yes. That was in the Biden administration. The issue that I raised was very much the reality on the ground in Israel when I was there.
May I contribute something to your
softer approach? You would come on
your discussion. It reminds me at the very beginning of the negotiations I held with President Abbas, going back to 2000, end of 2006, beginning of 2007, what eventually was known to be the Annapolis process, but actually it started long before Annapolis. At the very early stage, President Abbas said that he appoints Abu Allah to be the chairman of the Palestinian negotiating group. And I say to the President, why did you do that? I'm not certain that this is a good thing. He said, no, you don't know. Abu Allah loves this peace process very much. And I say to him, that's what scares me.
He loves
the process. He loves the process, and I want to take decisions and to move forward. And he's in love with the process. I don't want the process to take too much time. So, in a way, answering you or Nasser's questions and your comment, look, presently, Israel is not prepared for anything. That partly as a result of the terrible trauma that we have been through after the 7th of October, and I'm sure that you, secretaries, you are familiar with what happened then because you were at that time in Israel and you remember the reactions and the emotions and the traumas. But one thing the American president then advised us, which was thoughtful and deep, and we didn't listen to him because we didn't listen to anyone. Biden, when he came to Israel, he reminded us of what happened in America in September 11th, 2001. And then he said, my advice to you is don't be consumed completely by the rage and the emotions which are now overwhelm all of you. Think, and because you may make mistakes that we did. And therefore, I think that it is incumbent upon us to be able to overcome the natural desire of expressing our rage and the desire to avenge and whatnot, and to come to some realistic terms about what is good for our future. And therefore, we should engage in a process, obviously. Are we now prepared for it? Is the Israeli politics ready for it? Unfortunately, no. And this is why one of the reasons why, on the one hand, I campaign with Dr. al-Kidwa everywhere we can go, in America, in Europe, everywhere, and talk about the need for a process. And on the other hand, I'm doing everything I can together with many others to try and replace the Israeli government with a more solid, reasonable, normative leadership that will be also ready to consider the process of a two-state solution.
So we focused on politics in Israel. We focused on the importance of the role of the United States. What about the Arab countries and their influence over Hamas and in the region? Do you see them remaining deeply engaged, applying the kind of pressure on Hamas that will be needed even to accomplish phase one of the agreement? Because the confidence building will not really begin unless we can see that phase one is working. And that means the return of the remains of the remaining deceased hostages. It means having a process for some kind of disarmament of Hamas. I myself think that one has to be realistic. It won't be the last firearm in Hamas, but Hamas as a serious military threat. Do you see countries like Qatar and Turkey staying engaged, keeping the pressure on? And Nasser, why don't we begin with you?
Okay, let me say, what do I think with regard to position vis-a-vis Hamas? Hamas says now that we are not going to participate in governing Gaza. I don't think this is good enough. We need more than that. We need Hamas to understand that this is the new chapter, and we need it to accept, commit to ending its control over Gaza in all its forms. And that means political, administrative, as well as security. And security leads to putting the heavy arms under the control of the official body. In return, to be also frank with you, in return, I think that the door should be open for Hamas to have some structural transformation into a political party that does participate in the Palestinian political life under the Palestinian law, which should stipulate some regulations, some rules in this regard, some conditions, if you wish, in this regard. Now, to answer your question with regard to the Arab states, first of all, I have to say that Arab states do not have common positions, either on this one nor on other things. And you have here, of course, when it comes to Hamas, the position of the Emirates, Saudi Arabia is one thing, and the position of Qatar and Turkey, and probably to a lesser extent, much lesser extent, Egypt, is another thing. So what we need is to have a dialogue that first, unify the Arab position, and maybe also the Turkish position as well, which I don't think is impossible to achieve. But we need a dialogue. We need some discussion, some genuine discussion. In the past, discussion was easy because of the presence of the Palestinian maestro, who is, who normally is liked by his peers and, has confidence by his peers and things like that. And that maestro would bring the parties together and would push for a joint position. That maestro does not exist anymore, unfortunately, and that's why it's more difficult. But nevertheless, we ought to do it. We ought to have some dialogue among Arabs leading to this kind of situation. Now, finally, that means, I think, that I do believe that Qatar and Turkey will not obstruct any kind of reasonable understanding reached in this regard. I think they are maneuvering now because of what some Israelis say, that Hamas has to disarm and leave, which is unrealistic, of course. They are not going to disappear. And if we change the dialogue, if we change the discourse, we would be able, I think, to reach some kind of reasonable understanding along the line that I try to explain.
But if you look at the situation today, Hamas is not disarmed. They've been executing opposition within the Palestinian community amongst the opposition parties in Gaza. And it's not an unreasonable fear that they'll remain a threat, especially when they've fired projectiles into Israel, into the buffer zone, and killed Israeli soldiers. So
yes,
if there's not going to be the possibility of zero presence of Hamas, and from day one, the American position was stop saying eliminate Hamas. It's impossible. You won't eliminate it. You have to reduce it so that it's no longer a threat. I guess my question, and I'll go to you on this, Ehud, from the perspective of the Israeli public, with the government still using maximalist language in terms of disarmament and exile, what is the kind of point at which the message in Israel will be, it's now safe. It's, Israel's security is not threatened. And will that be enough to maintain security at a minimal level within Gaza?
Well, obviously, Hamas today is not the same threat that it was 2 years ago, okay? I think it's obvious, and God forbid, had it not been so, someone would have asked, what is the efficiency of the most powerful Israeli army after fighting 2 years, that if Hamas is more or less where it was? Hamas is not the threat for the existence of Israel. It's nonsense. It's not a threat in that level. But Hamas, which is still there with weapons and with some flexibility and freedom to make itself, felt, can create a lot of small events that can erupt into big events, and therefore it has to be more tightly supervised and held. I'm not certain that Turkey and Qatar are the best vehicles for this, and therefore I think that the international security force, including the Palestinians and Arab soldiers, and perhaps some Europeans, will be much more effective in providing this. Now, okay, don't call it complete disarm, don't call it elimination of every one of the Hamas, but taking it 2 or 3 steps further in the reduction of any option that Hamas may have in order to somehow steer the stability that we want to build vis-a-vis Gaza. And I think that that kind of operation, not the dependence on Turkey and Qatar, will speak to the Israeli public opinion better, because it will quieten down and will make Israelis feel that perhaps the enormous efforts and sacrifice of the Israeli fighting over the last 2 years, and in addition, these measures, is something that can guarantee the beginning of safer, not absolute safety, but much safer way of living in the south part of the state of Israel. And I guess that this is something that realistically we can speak about when we talk about security.
So we have about 5 minutes left, and we've just had a pretty far-ranging conversation about the current situation, the moment of possibility, and the risks. Maybe we can end by each of you spending a couple of minutes reflecting on whether at this moment, with a ceasefire, with the engagement of the United States and the various other countries in the region and around the world, whether we are closer to or farther away from a two-state solution. And what would have to happen in the next weeks and months for this moment not to be lost?
Who should start? You choose.
I couldn't hear you, I'm sorry.
Who starts?
Please.
Okay, listen, I think it's very important that we have gotten the engagement of the President of the United States in the last period of time. There was an engagement and there was a determination to implement the plan or the vision or whatever you want to call it. Now, it's very important to keep the engagement and the determination, because if this changes, God forbid, we will be going in the opposite direction. So it is important. And I think if we maintain this kind of engagement and determination, I think that will get us closer to the two-state solution.
Well, that's an optimistic closing note. Ehud.
Had someone told you, Jack, that in the middle of the war between Israel and Palestine and Gaza, and all that came with it, all the emotions and the traumas and the destruction and the killing, the two prominent, one Israeli former prime minister, one former foreign minister of the Palestinian Authority, and for that matter, also not unimportant, the nephew of Arafat, will issue a joint statement signed in agreement of what should be the end of the war and also the end of the conflict, the historic conflict between Israel and the Palestinians. You may have said, I mean, come, don't be a dreamer. Now I'll tell you something. We are dreamers, okay? Dr. al-Kidwa and myself are dreamers, but we are not naive. We are veterans of everything that politics can teach you. We have been everywhere. Okay, we have been in every position. We were in every conflict. We were in every controversy. We were in every position where you have to take decisions, and sometimes historic decisions, in order to move forward. And I'll tell you something. It all depends on leadership. On the leadership on the Palestinian side, which is lacking now, Israeli leadership, which is, I don't have to tell you, and I have to tell the people that are watching us what I think about them. I think that they have to be removed any minute. And also on the leadership of the international community, particularly of the United States of America. If the United States of America will not hesitate to do that, which may not seem to be popular in certain sections of political bases here and there, but will move forward with a long-range understanding about the strategic needs of the region, then it will end up with a peace agreement between us and the Palestinians on a two-state basis and a comprehensive regional normalization that will include the Saudis and the others and other Muslim countries. This is the strategy, this is the aim, this is what we have to fight for. And I believe that this is possible. If we will not believe, we will not work. If we will not work, we will not do. If we will not do, we will complain. I want to do.
Well, on that note, leadership is about proving that hope is not naivete, but it means rolling up your sleeves and doing hard things and demonstrating that the impossible is possible. So I hope that this conversation helps others to think about what they can do to move this conversation, this process forward, so that real progress can be made from this moment that we're in. Thank you both so much for joining us. Great
Thank you.
conversation. Look forward to staying engaged on these issues with both of you.
Thank you, Secretary, very much. It's been
Thank
delightful.
you.